Today we are talking on TikTok Tuesday about the gut microbiome and tic disorders. Is there an impact and an influence? So this study is a brand new kind of review of other studies. So it's a meta-analysis, so to speak, of the potential relationship between Tourette's and the gut microbiome. So this analysis just came out. And it's actually, we see a lot of studies out of China. China likes to do a lot of studies. And for some reason, especially on the tics and Tourette's, I'm not sure why that is, but it is. So I know that a lot of you have gone, Googled, you've read some studies, you've looked at some information. So we can talk about, when I look at studies, how I look at a study, how I break it down, and how I digest that information. So you have to start to question in a study, what did they include? What is missing? What are those factors that they have, parameters they've put together? What was the experiment conducted on? Was it rats? Was it humans? These kinds of things. So we're going to look at all of these studies. This particular study is on, and we're going to talk about two of them today, the relationship between Tourette's and the gut microbiome. And so when we look at this, you have to understand that there is a connection, the gut-brain axis, that's what this study is looking at, the connection between your gut and your brain. Your brain and your gut are connected by the vagus nerve. You're also going to see issues if you have leaky gut, because those, usually what are called lipopolysaccharides, are going to impact your brain, because if you have leaky gut, you're going to have leaky brain. You have more bacteria strains in your gut than you do cells in your body. You are more bacteria than you are human, okay? And that bacteria in your gut has a lot of influence. So for every one signal your brain sends to your gut sends 10 signals to your brain. So a lot of people have said the gut is the second brain, and it makes me wonder, well, is your gut really your first brain? It's really giving you those details. So for example, if you have a Candida overgrowth, you are more likely to have a sweet tooth. You are more likely to want to eat a bunch of sweets. Why? Because Candida feeds off of sugar. Feed me that sugar. So delicious. So that gut bacteria is really telling your body, like, hey, send this down my way because I love it and it makes me proliferate, and let's have some more of it. So you have to understand that the gut is very, very bossy. You can call it your second brain, but there is an axis. It's connected by the vagus nerve. And so when we look at this, one of the things that this was studied was actually looking at rat studies. So you have to understand that we do a lot of, well, not me personally, but studies in general, do a lot of animal research. And although very effective, it's really not giving us that whole look on, it's not giving us the whole look on what it would really be on an impact of a human, what's really going on in the gut, right? We can see it in a rat, like there's some influence there. This study really looked at bacteroids and ruminococci in the gut and Tourette's patients. And it's really looking at our Tourette's, an animal experiment with Tourette's. These dogs have me all a mess. And there does appear to be certain changes in Tourette syndrome when we start to alter the gut microbiome. And I think many of my clients can tell you when we start to get the gut back on track, they really start to see a lot of changes in what their children are experiencing. And so really the conclusion on this is that they find that there is a relationship between gut microbiota. This does not mean run out and get a probiotic. We're going to talk about that. And Tourette syndrome, and how we can start to alleviate symptoms. So many people will say, my kid needs a probiotic. The internet will tell you that your child needs a probiotic. The internet will say, oh, the best thing you can do is a probiotic. Parents who've done a probiotic, most of them will tell you, bad idea, because these kids are very sensitive and we're altering their gut microbiome very, very quickly. Their guts are not ready for it. A lot of them have leaky gut. And you can start a random probiotic off the shelf, and that probiotic may push your kid's gut in the wrong direction. Okay, so I do have a lot of parents who are like, let me do a probiotic. And then, I was gonna give you the story about this mom who she'd gone to her psychologist, and the psychologist was like, oh, you gotta use this probiotic. It's great for the gut-brain connection. And the kid's tics got worse, and mom was like, what am I doing wrong? And really, we have to start to look at the way that we are pushing their gut microbiome. Are we pushing it in the wrong direction? And you don't know that unless you test. This is why my clients do a stool pathogen test, because we need to know, like, hey, what do you actually need in the gut? What is the balance of your bacteroids? We could guess. This study talks about the balance of bacteroids. We could give you a probiotic and hope that it impacts your bacteroids. But we could also test and really figure out what your child needs as far as, do they need a probiotic? I have a lot of clients who have a genetic variant that probiotics don't work really well because they don't have good bowel soil. So we have to put something else in besides a probiotic. And those parents will get on here and tell you that they saw a huge difference, because I have clients who are taking massive amounts of probiotic and it's doing nothing. Why? Because they have this genetic variant. If you don't test, you don't know. You don't know what your bowel soil looks like without doing a stool pathogen test, without looking at genetics. So this study says, yes, there is a connection. But when I look at this, it's like, okay, there's a connection between 2 strains of bacteria, probiotic, in the gut in this study. But there are bazillions of other strains of bacteria in your gut. And it's really, really hard to figure out which ones are going to impact which thing. But we can look at the gut, several strains in the gut, and say, hey, ooh, you have a lot of really high Clostridia bacteria. Maybe we need to do some things to bring that down. Ooh, you have a lot of fungal overgrowth. You have a lot of Candida. Maybe we need to do some things to bring that down. Ooh, maybe your bacteroides and firmicutes really are imbalanced. What can we do? Because that imbalance really is a sign of inflammation. So if we're looking at the gut and we can see, oh, your bacteroids and your firmicutes are imbalanced, then we can do the things we need to start to target that inflammation. That's a sign of inflammation. It's not just saying, okay, these are imbalanced, we need to put in some of this or some of that. No, we have to start to target the inflammation. You have to understand that there are outside factors that are going to impact your gut microbiota. So yes, here, this study is saying there is a connection, which I agree. I know there's a connection, and many of you who are clients of ours can tell us, yes, there is a connection. But what are those things that are influencing that connection? Is there leaky gut? Is there food sensitivity? Is there stool pathogens? Is there fungal overgrowth? Are there toxins? Are there heavy metals? What are these things that are impacting our gut? Have you experienced trauma? Is there a lot of stress in your life? Is there a bully at school? We have to look at all of these factors that are going to impact our gut. Okay, you have to look at all of the outside factors. So it's kind of like the study on meat. Oh, meat causes colon cancer. When you look at the study and you analyze the data, that is not the case. They basically said, oh, you've had colon cancer, do you eat red meat? Okay, the two go together. Well, what's missing? Well, were they smoking? Were they drinking? Were they eating Krispy Kreme every day? No, they just said, oh, you have colon cancer, you eat meat, the two go together. Not you're eating a shit ton of sugar and processed foods and all of these other things that go with it. So you have to be able to take a study and look at the data and say, yeah, great. There is a gut-brain connection. There's a connection for these kids who have tics and Tourette's. But what is influencing that imbalance in the gut? And it's not just lack of probiotic. That's not what I see. There is environmental toxins, there's physical stress, there's biological stress, there's all of these things that are impacting the gut. So this next study actually made a lot of I'm going to say headlines. It wasn't really headlines, but it made a lot of play in some of the other groups as far as, oh my gosh, did you see this study on fecal transplants, poop transplants? One of my favorite topics is poop transplants because I think they're totally freaking fascinating because I know people who've had them done and it can actually change your personality to have a poop transplant. So fecal transplantation, this study was, a lot of people posted it in other groups. And I think it's fascinating. This is why I'm talking about this fecal transplantation study. One, because I think poop transplants are super cool. And two, we want to talk about this gut microbiome connection. So we can take this example, Googled that, I did too, because I'm like, oh my gosh. I have studied a lot of things, fecal transplants being one of them, but I thought it was amazing when it came out for tics and Tourette. So the study is a 2022 study. It came out a year ago, and it's fecal transplantation can alleviate tic severity and Tourette syndrome. Here's the keyword: mouse model, not humans, mouse model for modulating intestinal flora and promoting serotonin secretion. Mouse model. So this study was done on mice and fecal transplant and the fecal transplants. And what they found in this study, they took 80 Tourette syndrome mice and they took fecal specimens were collected for 3 weeks, and then they replaced, they take your poo and they replace your poo with someone else's poo. So here's what happens is they actually have a place where you can send in your poo and you can be a donor, you can be a poop donor, and they test it and make sure that it's what they're looking for, and then they will use it. So they don't just use anybody's poop, okay? They do not just use anybody's poop, but very clean. So this is what they've done with these mice, is they've taken this, what they would consider good poop, and replaced it. In the Tourette's mice, they replaced their poo. And what they found is that it may help to ameliorate Tourette syndrome by promoting 5-HT secretion. And so kind of what they're talking on here is, let's do some more studies. So I would love to see more of these studies done on people who are willing to do them. I think the problem with tics and Tourette's is that you have so many kids that are diagnosed with it that it's not really ethical to test kids, unless you're gonna maybe do like blood draw serum. You guys have heard me say blood draws are not the best way to look at what's going on in the body, because you don't see what's going on in the cell, you're not seeing what's going on in the gut, you're not looking at all these factors. And so this is a really good example of a study that people got super excited about. It is not easy to just get a poop transplant. You cannot just go to your pediatrician and say, hey, I want a poop transplant, I want a fecal transplant. Not gonna happen. And it's very difficult to find. So many people got so excited about this study. And I'm like, it's a really cool study. But we know from the previous study that there is a gut microbiome brain connection. There is a gut brain axis connection. But what is happening when we can see these two studies, this one on rats and this one on rats, we can see there's a connection, a gut microbiome connection. But how feasible is it for us to go out and get a fecal transplant and hope that it works? It's not. I mean, it's a cool study, and I know that it's exciting and people were excited about it. But if we can then take that other study and say, okay, man, there's a connection between the brain and the gut microbiome and tic disorders, what do we need to do? What do we need to do? Because I can't just run out and be like, hey, sign me up for a poop transplant. That's just not gonna happen. So, at least not anytime soon. So my question is, why aren't we looking, doctors in general, not me because I'm looking more at this gut microbiome connection? Your neurologist is never gonna talk to you about your gut microbiome. How many of you went to the neurologist and they talked to you about your gut microbiome? Not me, certainly not me. Mine just told me my son needed a good spanking. So we have to be able to say, okay, I have these factors. There's 4 triggering factors that are gonna impact your body, your gut, your life, your everything, your whole body, holistic. So you're gonna look at environmental factors. What are those environmental factors that are impacting your gut? Maybe it's foods you're eating. Maybe it's heavy metals. Maybe it's environmental toxins. Maybe it's fungus and mold, which kind of lead into really biological. So what are those biological factors? What are those things going on inside your body? Are there leaky gut? Are there fungus and mold? Are there underlying infections? What are those things that are happening biologically? Environmental, biological, physical. Are you sitting on your booty all day long? Are your kids sitting on their booty all day long and not getting any exercise? Exercise is extremely important for the gut, extremely important for making neurotransmitters, because you make about 90% of your neurotransmitters in your gut. So you need to be exercising. So when we talk about physical stressors, maybe there's some adjustments that need to be done by a chiropractor. So there's physical stressors, and then mental stressors. We think of mental stress and emotional stress as like, my mom yelled at me, my boss is a jerk, there's a bully at school, but it really can go above and beyond that. And when we're looking at that, we can really call that like metaphysical anatomy. What are those things that were stressful for us from birth? And many of you, I find this super fascinating, is that when we look at the metaphysical anatomy, the trauma that comes along with tic disorders is there some kind of trauma from your child's birth? Did they have the umbilical cord wrapped around their neck? Were they stuck? Were they breech? Was there, some kind of emergency C-section? Was there some kind of trauma around your birth, around their birth? So some of the things that we look at as far as trauma is that like a lot of kids from the time they are born are in this fight or flight state, because that is how they're born. They're born in this rush. My kid was stuck. My kid could not move. He was stuck for months. Like I had to sit with my arm over my head because his head was stuck under my ribs. I'm not a big woman. I'm kind of small. I am small. And so he was stuck. And it took 3 doctors to pull him out via C-section, but he couldn't move. And so one of the things we look at is if your kid can't move and they're in this state of fight or flight and then they're born, there is a trauma piece that goes along with it. See, Natasha says her child was breech. The more I look at it, the more I look at the connection. We have to look at the whole holistic connection. And I know people are like, girlfriend, you sound woo-woo. It isn't woo-woo. Trauma will impact you. It will impact your child. There's a great graduate study on parents whose children are diagnosed with chronic illnesses. 50% of them experience a sense of grief and loss. But you don't have time to process that grief and loss because you got to keep making lunch and going to soccer practice. It's not like somebody has died, but we still experience. See, you guys, we got to think about what is that trauma? And we really have to look at that. And that's not the whole piece. We're looking at all of those factors: environmental, biological, physical, mental, emotional. What are all of those? How that mental, emotional state can really impact you. If you're born in a state of fight or flight, ready to run, how's that going to impact you for the rest of your life? And so many parents will say, well, my kid's great, there's no tics, and then they sit down to watch TV, or they sit down to play a video game, or they sit down to do Legos, and they start ticking. Why? Because their body doesn't know how to relax. Their body doesn't know how to be set free from that state of fight or flight. Their body doesn't know how to relax. So when they're in that relaxed mode, their body has to keep moving because it's fight or flight, right? Your gut and your brain, it's like an atomic bomb for the gut. You blow everything up. They're born, especially through C-section, because when you're born through C-section, you miss that bacteria in the birth canal. Both of my kids were C-section. You miss that bacteria in the birth canal. So you're born by C-section. You don't have all of that good bacteria, not on your skin. You're not getting that good bacteria from the birth canal. You're born C-section, you have meconium, they give you some antibiotics, or maybe you get antibiotics like my kid for 457 strep throats and ear infections. So you guys, I want you to see that there's a much broader, bigger connection. There is not a magic pill, potion, or magic bean. There is not an overnight quick fix. And I'm here to tell you, there's not one. Time and time again, I'm going to tell you, Cincinnati Children's Hospital says, medications prescribed for tics do not cure tics, and rarely do they reduce symptoms more than 50%. We are looking for magical pills instead of looking for a lifetime solution. So this is where my approach is very, very different. I use a 3-step proprietary process that I created, that I went back to school, that I relearned everything I thought I knew about health and wellness. So I use something called comprehensive neuroimmune analysis. This is where I'm going to take 935 biomarkers. I'm going to look at the data. I'm going to put it together with your health history. Your health history plays a big role. We just talked about that, right? We talked about stress, birth stress. There's other stress too, but we talked about that stress at birth. We have to take that into account. How does this all kind of connect together? Was your child breastfed? Were they C-section? Like, what are these things? How do they all kind of go together? So the first step is comprehensive neuroimmune analysis. The second step is the foundational connection method. We have to connect that data. We don't just look at paper and say, this is what's happening. We have to connect it and look at it and correlate it. So we're going to connect everything, foundational connection method. And then we use restorative rescue strategy. We start to create long-term and short-term goals, not an overnight approach. I met with 2 clients last week that we have been working for a year together, and they are both like, man, we are really in this great place right now where we're not experiencing tics. I said, yes, it is a very, very slow process. It is not an overnight process. There's not one pill, potion, or magic bean. It is a slow process, and you have to look at all of the factors, and you can't hit all of the factors at once. This is where my process is phases and step by step, instead of like, oh, we're just gonna put 957 things in here and this is what you're gonna do. No, we actually have to break it down and do it in phases.